we as fans very much have a what have you done for me lately mentality when it comes to fighters. If you've had a long layoff or had a few lackluster performances in a row, you're washed, it's over. Fraud check, aisle 9. I hate that phrase, by the way. Seriously though, it's incredible how quickly fans forget just how good some already well-established fighters are. And today is all about those times they got reminded in dramatic fashion. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point. A huge thank you to our channel Hall of Famers for their endless support, and these are 15 great fighters getting slept on that woke everybody up. Number 15, Jose Aldo versus Cheeto Vera. I distinctly remember thinking at the conclusion of the Petr Yan title fight that it was time for Jose Aldo to hang up the gloves. It was a brutal beatdown in the 5th round, and it just felt like the sport had probably passed the King of Rio up at that point, which was fine and made sense. I mean, this was a guy who had done it all by that point. He was a living legend and someone that didn't need any of this anymore, especially after losing what would surely be his final title fight. But like so many fighters, he just kept going and was next booked with Cheeto Vera, who was coming off his win over Sean O'Malley, a potentially dangerous matchup, one that gave a lot of longtime Jose fans dread at the thought of his decline being even more steep, which is insane given the outcome, but at the time, I was legit worried for Aldo. What a fool I was for that one. He looked like vintage Jose out there, just decimating Cheeto with big, nasty body shots. He looked so clean and so fast. Spent the whole 3rd round doing his best Damian Maia impression. It was like, oh yeah, he's the King of Rio. Why was I worried about this? Of course, he is capable of a performance like this. He's one of the best fighters ever. Since then, Aldo's won 3 of 4 and is gonna go do boxing now or something. You know what? Whatever he wants to do, I will not be sleeping on him ever again.
Do we forget the man Jose Aldo?
Number 14, Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Assunção. When Cody Garbrandt took the bantamweight title from Dominic Cruz, it looked like he might go on to be the greatest champion in the division's history. After all, that was how many felt about Dom, and he just made him look silly in there that night. So it came as a bit of a shock how badly things turned out after that. Of course, he would lose in back-to-back title fights with his friend turned nemesis TJ Dillashaw, both times getting knocked out. But hey, TJ had already established himself as a champion, so it wasn't like he was fighting some scrub. And neither was Pedro Munoz. But because of the nature of the loss, Cody wildly swinging and getting KO'd in the 1st round, it just felt like, damn, this dude went from all-time hype to washed in record time. It didn't help that after that we wouldn't see him in the cage for over a year, struggling to recover from COVID.
I'm like, there's no way I have a blood clot. I had 3 of them in my arm. Didn't even know.
That's crazy.
So coming up on that Assunção fight, nobody was expecting much from Garbrandt, who really by that time had fallen out of the popular discourse about the division. Everybody had moved on, but on that night in front of 0 fans, Cody showed us that spark of greatness again and reminded everyone the reason he went from unranked to champion in just a year's time, putting him out cold in the 2nd round for a performance bonus winning finish. While he's struggled still since then, on that night it was the Cody G of old. Number 13, Andrei Arlovski versus Travis Browne. The Pitbull had quite the odyssey back to the octagon after that final fight of his first run back in 2008. The former heavyweight champion would see himself KO'd by Fedor in Affliction, decimated in Strikeforce, and eventually get his jaw broken by Rumble Johnson in World Series of Fighting. But that loss to Anthony was the only one in 7 fights, and if the UFC ever needs name value in a division, it's heavyweight, so they brought Arlovski back after 6 years away. His return victory would be a split decision over Brendan Schaub, who by that point was closer to being a comedian than a contender. And he certainly showed he still had something with that 1st round KO of Bigfoot Silva in his 2nd fight, but the bout that got everybody excited was when he TKO'd Travis Browne. Hapa had only ever had that freak loss to Silva and a recent failed title eliminator against Fabricio Verdum. He was a top guy in the division, and while that KO on Bigfoot made Arlovski fans nostalgic, the wild brawl and finish of Browne had everybody on notice that maybe Andre was gearing up for another run. And he was. He would beat perennial contender Frank Mir before coming up short in a title eliminator against Stipe Miocic. The Pitbull has since had roughly 200 fights in the division, but that win over Browne after his long journey back to the cage was the reminder fans needed that, oh yeah, this was a champion caliber fighter. Number 12, Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot Silva. Silva. One of the more interesting and unlikely heavyweight runs ever is that of Mark Hunt. He came out of K1 and racked up impressive wins in Pride over the likes of Wanderlei Silva and Miro Crocop. He had a respectable effort against Fedor, but prior to signing with the UFC, he went on a 5-fight losing streak, getting finished in every bout, and then in his debut, he would be subbed in just over a minute by Sean McCorkle. That Hunt was able to reestablish himself when he was on the brink of being relegated to regional shows is a testament to how exciting he is when he's on his game.
He said, listen, you're part of the Pride deal, we'll pay you to stay home. You know, he said, no, I want to come in and I want to fight and I want to earn this money, and he did it.
And 4 victories with 3 incredible knockouts later, Mark found himself in a title eliminator with Junior Dos Santos. Such is the heavyweight division, of course, it doesn't take much to get to the top, but there are levels to this, as Corey Anderson would say, and this was a brutal and lopsided beating. JDS outstruck Hunt 3-1, scored 2 knockdowns, and earned the finish with a devastating spinning hook kick to Mark's dome. It was fun to see him get some walk-off KOs, but it looked like against the elite of the division, this was the ceiling for old Hunto. Then he went and had the greatest heavyweight fight in history, probably. Yes, his war with Bigfoot Silva was fight of the year material, if not for that PED fail by Antonio after the fact. But it yet again re-elevated Mark to premier status after looking like there was no chance in hell he would recover after that JDS loss. He followed that up by KOing the iron-chinned Roy Nelson for the knockout of the year. The dude was on fire again. All of that would culminate in an interim title fight with Fabricio Verdum, which Hunt would unfortunately lose. Number 11, Vitor Belfort versus Yoshi Takahashi. Frank Trigg said it perfectly on commentary right before the start of this fight.
The Phenom was a Phenom for so long, and then just kind of lost it.
The worst 2-year run of Belfort's career and life had just taken place. After dropping the UFC light heavyweight title to Randy Couture, Vitor would see 3 more losses in major competition. First, by way of split decision to Tito Ortiz in his final UFC bout for the time, then he got subbed by Alistair Overeem in the first round of the Pride Middleweight GP, and would lose a rematch to the Reem on an early Strikeforce card. All of this taking place a year or so after tragically losing his sister. The glorious prospect of Belfort at 19 years old was now a decade gone, and nobody was expecting much against former King of Pancrase Yoshi Takahashi. But 36 seconds in, Belfort would blitz Takahashi in his signature style and blast him with a left that put the lights out.
Oh, that's it! Oh my gosh, Vitor's back!
It was a reminder that even when he was down, he was still one of the most dangerous strikers in this sport. Number 10, Frankie Edgar versus Yair Rodriguez. To understand why this entry is so great, you need both the context of where Frankie was at this point of his career and Yair. For Edgar, we were now 5 years removed from his lightweight title reign. He'd had 2 featherweight title bouts since against Jose Aldo and came up short in both. He was 35, fighting Jeremy Stevens on the UFC 205 prelims, despite still being ranked number 2 at featherweight. Despite the ranking, it felt like Edgar was maybe settling into his twilight. In contrast, Rodriguez was 15-1. He'd won 5 straight in the UFC since his debut. He was young, he was flashy, and he had just absolutely murdered poor BJ Penn in his last fight. It felt like maybe the UFC was setting Frankie up for the same fate. In fact, Yair requested this fight specifically.
My coaches and my team, they asked for him because we think it's the best fight for us.
Well, be careful what you wish for. Edgar beat the brakes off Rodriguez, busting him up on the ground for the better part of 2 rounds, until the doctor had to call it on the account of his face looking like a Street Fighter game over screen.
You hardly recognize Yair Rodriguez.
Wow. A 10-minute reminder that Edgar could definitely still go. Number 9, Robert Whittaker versus Ikram Aliskerov. Hey, look, it's the inspiration for this list. It's kind of crazy that anybody would ever feel like Whittaker had dropped off given how talented we all know he is, but the circumstances didn't help him. It's been 5 years since he held the middleweight title. He got himself back up there and then lost that rematch to Izzy. Then he got to the title eliminator with DDP and got TKO'd. Sure, he beat Paulo Costa earlier in the year, but it wasn't one of those oh my god he's back moments, especially considering the trouble Costa had had in his career. And when he was originally booked up with Khamzat Chimaev, it kind of felt like Bobby was maybe in for a bad time. But of course Chimaev would have to withdraw and Aliskerov would take his place. A guy who had only ever lost to Khamzat and had 2 first-round finishes in his budding UFC career. The last time Sir Knuckles had a finish was all the way back in 2017. In a lot of ways, this loss could have been so much more devastating to Whittaker's career than if he'd been defeated defeated by Boers. But we don't have to think about that at all because Bobby Knuckles lived up to his name and put away Aliskerov with some nasty shots in under 2 minutes. And just like that, performance bonus, everybody got reminded how great he is, and now he's right back in the mix for a potential title challenge. I'm sorry we ever doubted you, Robert.
Thank you very much.
Number 8, Nate Diaz versus Michael Johnson. In the case of Nate Diaz prior to this Michael Johnson fight, we wanted to forget about him. It was a bad time for Nathan. The low point of his career, no doubt about it. Since losing his title challenge a few years prior, Diaz then got demolished by Josh Thompson, rebounded with an incredible first-round stop of Gray Maynard, only to sit for an entire year, come back and miss weight by 5.5 pounds, and then have the worst fight he's ever had against Rafael dos Anjos. Just absolutely demolished from the open to the final horn, and then he had another whole year off. So in 2 years' time, our only memory of Diaz was the worst he'd ever looked. It wasn't that people didn't think he was capable of beating Michael Johnson, it was just that nobody really had any expectation of Nate at that point anymore anyway. Then he showed us why he's always been that needle mover. It was classic Diaz in a fight of the night banger. Both guys threw over 300 strikes in 15 minutes. It was fantastic. Nate looked sharp, he put on a show, he got the win, and he gave the most Nate Diaz post-fight interview of all time.
Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for, motherfucker.
And immediately after 2 years of being an afterthought, was again your favorite fighter's favorite fighter. Number 7, Donald Cerrone versus Alex Hernandez. If this fight had been a bigger moment in terms of what it meant to the sport, it would probably be my number 1 because it is just one of the best y'all must have forgot moments ever. 30 fights into his UFC run, we'd pretty much seen everything we were going to see from Cowboy Cerrone. His fight style was what it was, and he'd reached about as far as he was going to. His only title challenge now 4 years past. Having lost 4 of his last 6 and having parted ways with longtime Jim Jackson Wink, Donald needed some kind of spark, and he thought that might be returning to lightweight after a 10-fight run at 170. Greeting him would be a young gun new in town with just 2 UFC bouts, but an impressive as hell debut, KOing Beneil Dariush in 42 seconds. Hernandez played the young cocky asshole to perfection in the build-up to this one.
I'll tell you this, little friend, I'll be sending your geriatric ass fucking yeehawing back to the stables on Saturday.
But like all good westerns, the old grizzled cowboy had at least one good one left in him, and that fight would absolutely be this one. Despite his aggressiveness and confidence, Hernandez would be worn down over the course of 2 rounds, battered and busted up by the veteran, who finished Alex off with a head kick and a beatdown on the ground. Hernandez and all of us were reminded that when Cerrone was dialed in, he was pretty damn good.
The old man still got it.
Number 6, Jens Pulver versus Cub Swanson. I absolutely love this one, even though I hate seeing my boy Cub Swanson get beat. But you couldn't help but feel great for the veteran Jens Pulver, who had spent the last year just being utterly disrespected. Since Jens spent his time prior to the Tough Boom primarily in Japan after leaving the UFC in 2002, this new crop of fans weren't as familiar with him, and things did not go well when he finally got back to the promotion. First, he was KO'd in 47 seconds in a shocker by Joe Lozon, who was going to be on the season of The Ultimate Fighter he was coaching. A season he had to be coaching up against everybody's favorite and the coolest guy ever at the time, BJ Penn, who then finished Pulver in their coach's bout and sent Jens packing from the UFC yet again. So debuting in the WEC and against a killer like Swanson, who was nearly a decade younger, it just felt like we were seeing the dying days of a pioneer in the sport, one who in recent years wasn't even getting the respect he deserved.
I'm done being the ball, I'm ready to be the bat. No more hitting home runs off on me. No more building your name because you took me out of the park.
Jens would immediately take an anaconda choke on a takedown attempt by Swanson and get the victory in just 23 seconds, setting him up immediately for a title fight. Lil Evil was back and he was coming for WEC gold. He would lose a banger to Uriah Faber and unfortunately go on a 6-fight skid, but he got to show a flash of his greatness in that Cub fight, and it was awesome. Number 5, Max Holloway versus Arnold Allen. So I'm gonna cheat here a little bit, and I know I said Arnold Allen, and that one makes the most sense since it came after Holloway's 3rd loss to Volk and against a really strong up-and-comer, but I also want to talk about when Max went Ultra Instinct on Calvin Kattar. The fight came off the heels of his back-to-back losses to Alexander the Great, and if there was any doubt that Holloway still had it in him and wasn't going anywhere, they were laid to rest with that performance.
I have never seen anything like
like this in my life, bro.
It's the Max Holloway show tonight.
447 strikes landed, no-look strikes, talking to the commentary team. Just one of the craziest performances that's ever happened. Had to mention it. But okay, so after that he beats Yair, he gets his third shot at Volk, and again, he loses. So now it's like, what is Holloway going to do? The chances of him ever getting another shot at Alex at that point seemed just about zero. And then there was Arnold Allen, 19-1, never lost in the UFC, just about to turn 30 and be in his prime. It felt like he was gearing up for a run. And a victory over a guy like Max would have been the piece he needed to shoot to stardom. But those accolades would have to wait, because you all must have forgot that Max Holloway doesn't play games.
I'm not that guy, you know what I mean?
You of course are well aware of that right now after his BMF victory, but he showed it with a masterful 5-round performance against Allen, landing nearly double what Arnold would and winning 4 of 5 rounds on 2 judges' cards. It was a statement win if there ever was one, and the statement was, Max ain't going anywhere. Number 4, Miro Crocop wins the Ryzen GP. One of the great tragedies of our sport was Miro Crocop's run in the UFC. He came in from Pride, this mythical force, and was quickly and violently brought back down to earth, getting finished 5 times in 6 losses, with very few positive highlights from the whole experience. He came back to the promotion for a single fight in 2015, where he got his win back against Gabriel Gonzaga before USADA sent him packing to Japan, and a return to greatness by the way of the 2016 Ryzen World GP tournament. Scoring finishes in every round, 3 of them in under 2.5 minutes, and fighting 3 times in 3 days, beating King Mo, Baruto Kaido, and Amir Ali Akbari. The 42-year-old Miro Crocop was in rare form, a glimpse of the good old days when he was an absolute terror in Pride. Given his advanced age and just how far he was from his prime, it's hard not to rank this randomly awesome tournament run so high on this list, even if it ultimately didn't mean a ton to the larger sport at the time. I do not care though, it was so awesome seeing Crocop win. Number 3, Glover Teixeira versus Jan Blachowicz. So you can absolutely argue that being in a title fight like Glover was against Jan Blachowicz required quite a bit of effort to get that opportunity, and so fans were very much not sleeping on Teixeira, but they were, because there's having a good run and being a champion level fighter. Those are 2 different things. Yes, Glover did have a great run up to that light heavyweight title challenge, 5 wins in a row, and finishes of former title challengers like Anthony Smith and Thiago Santos, but Blachowicz at the time was coming off his dominant win over Izzy in their super fight, which was his first title defense, but that victory elevated him so much he already felt really special, and so it was like, okay, what a cool thing that Teixeira did, making it all the way back to the title 7 whole years after he challenged against Jon Jones, and at 42 years old no less. It was a great story, but now the dream was over. Of course he was going to get beat badly, and that was just that. Most of us had no doubt in our minds, but we were fools to sleep on old man Glover. He still had plenty in the tank and gave all of it to Jan before scoring a 2nd round submission victory to earn the title after all that time.
He actually did it! Oh my goodness!
Such an incredible moment, and in large part because so many of us assumed Teixeira just wasn't on that level anymore. Number 2, Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane. It's pretty insane to say that people were sleeping on the arguable greatest fighter of all time. Like, he's the best to ever do it. What is there to sleep on? But try to cast your mind back to 2023. I know that's a long time ago. Jones' return was after a 3-year layoff from the sport. And if you recall the last 2 fights he had, a lot of fans argued that he'd actually lost. They were by far the worst of his title reigns at 205. And so for this guy to be gone that long, to potentially have been in decline the last 2 times we saw him in the cage, and now be bumping up to heavyweight and putting on a ton of mass, there were so many questions going into that fight with Ciryl Gane for the vacant heavyweight title. I didn't know what to expect, and if you said you did, I'm calling you a liar to your face. Was greatness a possibility? Of course. It's Jon Jones. But could I see a sloppy old oversized rusty bones going out there and shitting the bed because he held on to the dream just a bit too long? 100%.
Losing is not an option. This is not just a sporting event to me. This is my life.
What we got, of course, was literal perfection. You couldn't win a fight any more perfectly than Jon did in those 2 minutes and 4 seconds leading up to the choke. Yes, we all forgot, and Jones reminded us why he's the best that's ever stepped into the cage. Number 1, Randy Couture versus Chuck Liddell. Now, after what I just said, you might be asking, how can you put Randy over Jon? After all, Couture was still very much active at the point that he fought Liddell. He was just in a heavyweight title fight less than a year before. Who was sleeping on this man? Well, the UFC UFC was. They booked this fight as a showcase for Chuck. When champion Tito Ortiz refused to fight him, bringing Couture down to 205 as a big name that Liddell could destroy for the interim title, putting more pressure on Ortiz, was the plan. After losing the heavyweight strap to Josh Barnett and then a vacant title fight with Rico Rodriguez, the popular sentiment around the sport was that Couture was done. The best of his career was well behind him. He was coming up on 40 in 2 weeks, and this was probably going to be his last big fight. Well, Captain America crapped all over everybody's plans on that night, outstriking the striker and TKOing Liddell in the 3rd round to earn interim gold and set up a unification bout with Ortiz, which he would win as well.
What an impressive and inspirational athlete.
Bonus y'all must have forgot moment, Randy coming out of retirement at 43 and beating the holy hell out of Tim Sylvia for 5 rounds to become the oldest champion in UFC history.
That guy is my hero.
He was the king of getting slept on and showing up to remind everybody that he's one of the best to ever do it, and he's number 1 on this damn list. But the Naturals got nothing on the incredible Max Randall. There's no sleeping on his editing skills because he's been the GOAT since day 1. Please follow him on all his socials and check out his awesome YouTube channel. A massive thank you to our channel Hall of Famers. You guys make so much of what we do here every week possible. Fight fans, consider hitting that join button to become one yourself. There's a ton of exclusive content if you just can't get enough of MMA On Point. Like and subscribe to remind everybody why you're the best in the world, and leave a comment on your favorite slept on fighters told you so moments. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. I will see you around the way.